We're going to start our next panel. We've had a change in the agenda, and today we're going to hear from Jean Assayas, who is a Board of Trustees for Stillman College. This session is the giving insights on best practice for leading with healing. And so a lot of what we have had in the leadership journey entails financial wellness for the CFO, workplace wellness for the CHRO, mental, emotional wellness for the CEO, physical wellness for the board, relationship wellness for the CMO, CRO. And so we will hear about leading with healing from Jean today. Thanks. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my understanding that I am standing in between a nice snack. So what I want to do is actually make this as interactive as possible. So as Sabrina indicated, my name is Gene Axius. I am the president and CEO of Creating Healthier Communities. We're a nationwide nonprofit that's been around for nearly 70 years, working with businesses as well as 5,000 nonprofits to address the barriers to health. In addition to that, I bring roughly about 20 years of experience across public, private, and nonprofit sectors, helping organizations increase their impact as it relates to addressing health equity, systems transformation. I played a key role in preserving the Medicaid program back in Washington, D.C., as well as thinking about ways in which we can ensure that people have an opportunity to live their optimal health. And within this context, we're going to be talking about leaders at all levels of the organization, from the board level to the C-suite, all the way through staff. So just really quickly, when you think about the opportunities around leading with healing, one of the things that's often talked about in leadership is really the fact that it's very hard to lead other people if you can't lead yourself first. So I really want to make sure that this is very interactive. Work is a social driver of health. And what I mean by that is the fact that where you work actually influences the quality of your life, and in many cases, the quantity of your life. According to Edelman Trust report, 50% of Americans indicated that they were in poor to bad health. And that in addition, we've seen a growing awareness. There's been a range of articles in different outlets that highlights the toll that mental health and the pressures of leading is having on C-suite executives, whether it's suicide or having to leave the workplace for extended periods of time or the like. In 2022, employers around the world had roughly about 3 billion employees. So I'm a systems change person, right? So if you want to think about ways in which you want to have a ripple effect and improving the health of your workforce and improving the health of your C-suite, and as well as think about the culture of your board, really kind of think about this from a systems perspective. So if employers have an opportunity to influence about 3.2 billion employees worldwide, and we know that for every 3 seconds of every 3 minutes of our existence, one of those minutes at least is dedicated to what we do on a day-to-day basis, then we have an opportunity to really kind of start to think about what's the mindset we should have as leaders and really fostering a culture of health. So as you've heard from our previous speakers, in this war for talent, employers have a great responsibility to promote a culture of health and supporting their employees' overall well-being. And that goes just beyond the physical and the medical care. It gets into the emotional, it gets into the financial, it gets into the issues of belonging within the workplace. And not having a strategic strategy that takes into account the whole person can be actually catastrophic towards the bottom line of a company. So as we kind of talk through the next couple of minutes, I would love to hear from you in terms of exactly what are some of the practices as an organization that you're implementing to create a culture of health and total well-being? How do you know whether or not you're being successful or the executive team is being successful in fostering that? So I've come up with what I refer to as, and many things to Sabrina, 5 different practices or mindsets, and I call those the B's, B. So the first one is to be bold in setting a vision. What is the vision of the organization in terms of promoting a culture of health to ensure that the organization's around in the next 10, 15, 20 years to actually achieve the impact that it seeks to make? How do you know? What are the conversations taking place within the C-suite or at the board level that actually gets into this conversation around the health of your workforce. This requires really reframing what the vision is. So for us at CHC is that for every person in every community should have an opportunity to live their healthiest life. But we had to have a very thoughtful conversation with our board in terms of exactly what do we mean by health and what do we mean by opportunity and how is health and opportunity connected and how does that connect to our North Star as an organization? And as leaders, how are we actually modeling the way? In addition to setting the vision and the mindset, is ensuring that there's action a strategy. So we've just actually completed a 5-year strategic plan for the organization. And in the course of the 5-year strategic plan, clearly thinking about the impact was critically important. How we're going to be relevant to our various stakeholders was another area of focus for us. Clearly thinking about diversifying revenue, which is, I think, a key focus for companies, whether you're in public, private, or in a nonprofit organization. But the other aspect of this too was the fact that we needed to have an operational plan to actually ensure that we are aligning our strategy to the vision that we seek. So part of that was to focus on what we refer to as a people plan. And within that, we were very fortunate to work with the McKinsey to do an organizational health assessment across 9 different dimensions, where we actually heard back from our employees and had a 94 response rate to get a sense in terms of exactly where are the opportunities for us to improve in creating a culture of health. And as leaders, which is one of the dimensions, how are we modeling the way? So the first was to be bold in setting a vision for your organization in terms of exactly how are we going to accelerate the pace of change and ensure that your organization is healthy in all of its dimensions, with a particular focus on your employees. The second is to be very intentional in aligning the organization with the actual vision itself. So we know that culture eats strategy each and every day. And we heard from our previous speakers about the importance of actually embedding strategy into your performance systems and ensuring that what you focus on and what you actually evaluate are aligned in order to drive systemic change. So focus on the things that matter most. And one of the strategies here is to really kind of focus on one particular thing. In our case, we focused on culture. Because of the McKinsey OHI survey, we realized that culture was critically important. And for us, it was creating a culture of innovation and learning. So what we did was actually create a cross-functional team across our enterprise that represented employees at all levels of the organization. So you heard earlier that oftentimes your employees that are on the front lines have a lot of ideas and then it gets muddled through in terms of driving growth. So our strategy here was to actually ensure that we were getting volunteers from the front lines to be part of this enterprise committee to drive a culture of innovation and learning within our culture as relates to actually promoting health. This committee is looking at our policies, our practices, as well as our programs internally as well as externally to ensure that there's alignment. Not only are we doing things to innovate, whether it's a 4-day work week to promote a better balance between or better integration between what workers say they want and the flexibility that they need, but we're also looking at other ways where we can actually foster that type of innovation on a day-to-day basis. Promoting well-being, and that goes beyond our employee assistance programs. That is actually thinking about ways in which we can create different opportunities of connection throughout the work week, where employees get an opportunity to meet with purpose, as well as thinking about ways where we can foster activities that promotes overall well-being because work and social connection reduces social isolation. The other piece that I would just quickly mention is that the opportunities to think about different innovations that we're seeing in different industries, whether it's a sabbatical for a short period of time, where leaders get an opportunity to take a 4 to 5 week break, where their emails are turned off, and they actually get an opportunity to get some renewal and to rest and to rejuvenate, and then to come back into the workforce totally renewed to continue to do the work of the organization. So the first one was to be bold in setting a vision for exactly what does total health and well-being look like for you within your organizational culture. The second was to be intentional in terms of aligning that or the organization with respects to the vision. The third is around being connected, uh, really thinking about creating moments of connection, building off the previous speaker that talked about board members having an opportunity to engage with top performers or top talent, looking at ways where, in this case, AIG, for example, created opportunities to have candid conversations or courageous conversations with staff across the globe. And that included either the executive team or board members, again, to foster that culture of health. Or Kaiser, who is very intentional about getting employee feedback by incorporating and conducting a series of assessments throughout the year and looking at exactly what staff are telling the leadership with regards to the health of their department, the health of their unit, the health of their division, and not just what is the leadership doing with the data, but they're also reporting that data back out. They're having conversations at all levels within their organization to really drive systemic change. In addition to being connected, there's an opportunity as leaders for us to celebrate not just the big wins, but also the small wins, and then also to create opportunities to learn from failure. Going back to the earlier point that I mentioned earlier about culture and creating a environment of innovation. At our organization, when I first started as the CEO, I mentioned that it's important for us to fail fast. And the feedback that I got was, well, failure, we don't like the term failure, but that was an indication that we needed to do something about our culture to foster greater learning. So we created an after action report for each initiative. So at all levels, whether it's the C suite modeling the way or the employees at the front lines, looking for opportunities to learn and improve and continue to improve is a way that we're actually celebrating that. And as leaders, we're actually modeling when we didn't get something right, when we did miss the mark, and what we learned from that. So be bold, be intentional, be connected. And then the other aspect of this too is to be very thoughtful in terms of exactly engaging the board. Uh, Board members have a diverse set of skills and experiences and are willing to help. And one of the things I've learned as a CEO is the opportunity to ask the right questions and to engage board members at the right time to solve the right challenge facing the organization by focusing exactly on the future of where we want to be. The last is to be a model. As I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to lead others if we're not willing to first lead ourselves. So, as leaders, what are we doing in terms of self care? What are we doing in terms of deplugging? What are we doing in order to renew ourselves, in order to be better for our staff, as well as for those who rely so heavily on us? We all have a to do list. And one of the key takeaways from today's conversation that I want to encourage you is to have a to learn list. What are the things that you do on a daily basis to learn? Not just to do, but to learn. And in addition to learning, what are the things that you're doing in terms of being to be? So realizing that we're modeling the way each day, and that there's an opportunity for us to really approach our leadership with a tremendous amount of humility, particularly after what we collectively have been through over the last 3+ years, and to create a culture of vulnerability where we say, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. We didn't get this right, but let's dissect this and figure out a better way moving forward. And as I tell my leadership team, is the fact that my goal is to actually be in the trenches with you, not to do the work for you, but when you're in the trenches, I will get in the trenches with you. So you know that I have your back. And how do we actually look at the data and the feedback that's coming at all levels of the organization to start to close those gaps? So finally, these 5 to be's, if you will, really boils down to this fundamental question. What if companies, all who are represented here today, decided to flip the game and really focus on being competitive, not from the vantage point of what your market share is, but really in terms of to what extent do you have the healthiest and happiest employees to drive the impact that you seek? What if that was the frame that we actually use? So I wanted to open it up to all of you to hear from you in terms of exactly what are some of the practices that you are implementing for yourself as relates to any of these two Bs, both in terms of exactly how you're modeling the way and focus on your own self-care, or how you're actually leading your organization or asking those questions at the board level around the organizational health of the company in which you serve. And what can we learn from each other? Thank you.
Thanks. Jamal.
Thank you for the conversation. My name is Jamal Glenn. I'm an investor, university professor. I'm curious how you think about remote work, right? We're 3-4 years into the pandemic. We saw about 3-4 decades of remote work trends sort of smashed into this small period. I've got a lot of strong convictions. I actually think remote work is more of a workers' rights issue than it is a productivity issue, and I think it's quite frankly a tool that people use for sort of health and well-being. So I'm actually curious how you think about remote work in the context of this broader well-being conversation.
Well, thank you so much for that question. So we know that from the data, and I believe McKinsey came out with some reports on this, as well as Microsoft has done some work, that there's some benefits and also some challenges, particularly as it relates to remote work. Some of the benefits to the point that you just mentioned is around greater flexibility. Oftentimes, workers seem to enjoy having a little bit more of that freedom of not having to quote unquote commute. One of the downsides is actually the social isolation that it might present. And how do you actually create a culture within this new world of work? I think that there is some opportunities to think about that hybrid approach in terms of exactly how are we creating intentional moments of connection throughout the entire organization. And I will tell you that I think your framing that this is more of a workers' right is very spot on. There's strong sentiment, particularly among employees, with regards to their thoughts on remote work. But at the same time, balancing that with business need is critically important. At CHC, we have a 4-day work week. The prior CEO did not make the decision to actually have the workforce come back after COVID. He was generous enough to leave that for me to decide. And one of the things that we actually had to do was was to really have a conversation with our workforce about why we needed to move into a direction of bringing the workforce back. And part of that was, I think someone mentioned earlier, is the fact that, and particularly during the AI segment, I thought was extremely powerful, that if we're moving slowly and our competitors are moving quickly, we are putting ourselves in a situation where we may not be able to be competitive. And one of the things that we actually did was actually assess what the return to work policies were for our employers, for those who we compete against. In addition, we actually took the time to kind of hear from staff in terms of exactly their thoughts. One of the things I also did was actually ask my executive team to come back to the office 2 days a week. And I wanted to test this out. And it was very interesting, some of the observations that I learned just during that process. So the question here is the fact that if your leaders are not modeling the way, it becomes very difficult, particularly for staff to do the same. So that's a long way of saying is the fact that I do believe that it's important. Like you can't beat this ability to be connected, to be in person, to have these random conversations, to meet new people. And we know that those random bumps in the hallway oftentimes generate new ideas and new opportunities of collaboration. So the question becomes, in this new world of work, how are companies really reimagining how they create a culture where, whether it's in a virtual setting or in-person setting, that you're being very intentional about those opportunities for collaboration and those opportunities for meaningful engagement.
I just use my regular voice. Don't worry. But Derek Gregory, I'm CEO and founder of the Bridge Builder Group. One of the things my long career in risk management, in particular in the audit, accounting, and finance region, but I found over the recent years, my ministry background has come into play. And one of the questions I have for you, and then I want to make a statement, is as you engaged around your bees and you talk to the companies around the wellness point, how have companies embraced that at the board level? Because you have this um, human capital investment that you have there, which to me, from a risk management standpoint, to make that type of investment only to see it walk away because of culture is problematic. How have they responded to that type of feedback?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. One of the conversations that I think many boards are having is really one that's very forward looking. What type of board do we want to be moving forward? What is the culture of the board that we want to have in order to support the organization, not just currently, but within the next 5 to 10 years? Given the toll of mental health and what we're seeing at all levels within an organization, what does that mean in terms of board members getting an opportunity to connect? So some companies actually spend time in addition to the board dinners the night before a board meeting or before board committee meetings are implementing an annual board retreat where part of that is actually an opportunity for board members to connect, to get to know themselves, each other on a personal level, as well as to be able to build those relationships with the executive team and some of the rising stars within the company. But I think your point is well taken that as companies are starting to reimagine exactly how they're going to be more relevant, if you will, to their different stakeholders, and that why factor is becoming more and more important, both in terms of for employees as well as for the leadership of these organizations. I think boards are starting to have a conversation in terms of exactly what does that actually look like and mean for the board? Are board members only coming together around committee meetings and the board meeting and get going home? Or are there opportunities to really kind of foster a culture of well-being and support, even at the board level? Because well-being can take different forms. There's some organizations where board members, in addition to a board retreat, where there's a range of different things that board members actually do in order to promote quote unquote health, whether that is doing walking meetings or doing different types of activities throughout a particular cycle to support health, both for the board as well as for the management team. So I think that there's different levels, and I think that organizations, particularly as the future of work has changed drastically, and companies are grappling with many of the things that we are talking about here today, that boards are starting to look inward and say, okay, what type of board do I want to be? What type of culture do we want to have?
I had the experience back in October. The Executive Leadership Council had their gala here in the DC area. And then the next day they had their brunch. At the brunch, I was approached and asked to pray at the end of the brunch just for the folks that were there. And their response was palpable. People called me, people emailed me after the fact because of the prayer, but it reconfirmed a need that's out there, and we're developing a podcast as a result of that additional feedback because many of us recognize problems with people who are homeless, people who have physical disabilities. We can see those very easily. But this group here, many of us who are well-to-do, have nice homes, nice cars, we have all these what I call things that cover up the fact that we have problems and issues. We're so used to focusing on the down and out that there's nobody really focusing on the up and out. And the up and out is who I'm dealing with in the podcast. And that I ask for you guys to pray for us because we're going to put that out there on a weekly basis, messages, positive messages to this crowd, because we hide behind our fluence and we hide our brokenness in ways that is very harmful. And so we hope that we can make a difference in that way.
Thank you. So one of my favorite authors is Brian Stevenson. So I don't know if anyone know Brian, but he talks about it in his book, Just Mercy. And he says, we're all broken. And one of my favorite quotes from that book actually is the fact that he says, you can be an effective problem solver from a distance. There are nuances and details you'll miss unless you get close. And I think to your point that as leaders, oftentimes, we just want to, we have that distance. But again, you can't lead others if you're not effectively willing to lead yourself. So thank you for what you're doing. Other practices or strategies that you're implementing that you would want to share with others here today? Or I would love to add to my to learn list.
Thank you. Avantika Dang from Plum Alley Ventures. It's a question combined with a potential novel thought, which is whether you're a public company or private company, faster, harder, cheaper, better, other mantras, whether it's earnings call, if you're a private company and you're taking in venture capital, right? There's no sanity there. You know, we can talk about health and mental wellness, but we drive ourselves crazy to that point no matter what. And you could be a mental wellness app and you're still doing that. And so the novel thought is, could the board play a critical role here, not just in terms of walking meetings and the kumbaya that comes with, you know, with due respect with everything you're saying, but in a meaningful manner where the board leans in and says, we're going to do things differently for a public company. We could be Alphabet, we could be IBM. We're not going to promise our shareholders this idea of ongoing exponential returns year on, you know, every quarter there's an earnings call. We're going to commit to some level of stability, and we're not going to push so hard because you as investors and shareholders get a more meaningful economic benefit because of this ideology of sustainability, right? So you don't have churn, you don't have attrition. For every employee that leaves, it costs you 3x to bring a new employee in. So there's actually economic benefits and ROI to your investors and shareholders to have the board lean in a more meaningful manner on what it means like to set expectations for your workforce, but also for the investors.
Mhm. So one of the things that I think I want to just kind of pick up on is this idea that, you know, some of this might be soft, but, you know, to your point, I think there's a direct and indirect cost. There is a cost if we don't absolutely do nothing. That cost shows up in terms of the expenses to the company, in terms of the lack of productivity, in terms of people being absent, in terms of the medical costs that you're actually paying. And we know that it increases in terms of your health, the healthcare costs that companies actually pay. So there's a cost that we're paying. So the question is, you know, given what we're currently paying currently, and for what is many times an inefficient healthcare system and model, is there a way we can actually do some of this differently? And I think the question is, do we want to be courageous enough? Can a board be courageous enough to say, you know what, we're going to start something new? When this idea of a 4-day work week came about, there was a lot of conversation in the US about, oh, you know, what is this, right? But I can tell you, particularly from our company's perspective, that we're seeing greater commitment from our workforce because they don't feel as if they're constantly on. And we're actually seeing people go above and beyond in terms of actually helping to advance our mission as an organization. So I do think that there's an opportunity here to look at this within the context of what is the direct and indirect costs? What are we currently paying currently? What are we getting as a result? And is there an opportunity, even if we were to test and learn, before we rolled out our 4-day work week, we tested it. What day works best? We wanted to hear from staff. We wanted to see exactly what the productivity levels were. Let's test some things out and see if we can do something differently. And then you can actually be that company that is leading the pack.
Thank you. I think we're at
Thank you.
time. And so we will have a networking break, have some refreshments, and the only thing you have to chase is the best version of yourself. That's the takeaway from this panel.
Thank you.